What's up, everybody? This is Myles Turner of the Indiana Pacers, and listen to the Paceroos Podcast. Be sure to follow @Paceroos on Twitter.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Paceroos Podcast, the only Australian podcast with a bias towards our beloved Indiana Pacers. I'm your host, Adam. I'm joined by co-host Alex.
Very exciting times, Adam. Yep. Pacers basketball is back today. I am very excited.
And Justin.
Yes, thanks, Adam. Really excited to get this show underway and really excited to start recording episodes when we can start reviewing games and talking about upcoming games. I can't wait, and let's beat Detroit.
Indeed, we've got two big games to preview, but first we've got our latest interview with Pacers Sound and Sideline Guys podcaster and journalist Pat Boylan. I wasn't able to attend the interview, but Alex and Justin, what were your thoughts following the interview?
Yeah, obviously got to thank Pat again for coming on. I mean, to get these type of guests on just 7 episodes in is incredible. So thank you to him. But I thought, it was interesting his comments on the Domas extension about the reports and how they maybe were not true or had a little bit of bias towards getting more money. But you guys will hear that in the interview. So yeah, it was definitely interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was fantastic as well. And, we've had now JJ, Scott Agnes, and now Pat Boylan, and they all brought different insights to the table and just learnt an incredible amount from them both. So, really enjoyed the interview. My biggest takeaway was, again, him saying TJ Warren could be our leading scorer and the one he's looking out for. That really makes it 3 from 3 from our guests who have all mentioned TJ Warren as being hopefully the biggest surprise packet for the year.
Great. We'll throw to the interview now. Get TJ Warren in your daily fantasy teams, and we'll be back with you shortly on the Paceroos Podcast.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Paceroos Podcast. I am your co-host, Alex, joined today by Justin as always, but unfortunately, Adam could not be with us today, but we are joined nonetheless by a very special guest, Pat Boylan. Pat, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Hey, I appreciate you guys having me, and I know the time change is really drastic over there, so for getting up nice and early and making this work.
Yeah, the time differences are killer. 8 a.m. here, so I think it's about a 16-hour difference. I could be wrong. The talk of the town, obviously, around Indiana right now is the Sabonis extension that went down yesterday. I believe it was 4 years, $77 million with bonuses in there as well. So were you surprised at all that deal actually happened, seeing as there were those reports saying that the two sides were far apart on a deal?
Well, I had kind of a sneaky suspicion that a lot of those reports were the result of negotiating on either side, of the table. From Domantas Sabonis' perspective, look, this is a deal that's going to be in place for 4 years, and they got to make sure that they get this right, and they got to make sure that he takes care of himself, his agent takes care of him. Of course, he's got a dad who's been through this process before. And from the Pacers side, at the same point, you see teams all the time overpay for guys. Look what Charlotte has been going through. Of course, we know the Brooklyn Nets story of the past few years that they're just now getting themselves out of. And you got to make sure, especially as a smaller market team, that you don't fall into that same hole and then really handicap yourself down the road. I think both parties wanted to be together, but it's not always as easy as it is saying that to make that happen. That said, I had kind of a sneaky suspicion that might have been some posturing by both sides, and I think ultimately it was. And a lot of times you can't necessarily control the narrative that gets out of the building, and oftentimes Kevin Pritchard has talked about this. The incorrect one, leaves the Pacers building, and that's the one that gets out. So I think oftentimes you have to take some of those reports with a grain of salt. But I really think, I'm very confident Domantas wanted to be back. I'm very confident the Pacers wanted him back and to give this a real shot with those two in the front court. And so ultimately, I'm glad it got done. I'm not overly surprised, but anything that goes down to the last day like this, and ultimately the last couple of hours, you never know for sure. So Chad Buchanan, the general manager right under Kevin Pritchard, kind of explained the day as, lifting a cloud kind of away from the offices in the building. And I think that's a good way to put it. And the momentum is now the energy is now more focused on this home opener coming up on Wednesday.
Yeah, I think all Pacer fans were extremely excited to hear the news when Domas re-signed. Pat, you're around the team a lot, obviously. Was there any stress levels at practices, or was there any chemistry issues going into the Domas extension? Were the team worried a bit?
You have to imagine that kind of thing was discussed. But ultimately, I think everybody understands it's a business. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary during practice, but, everybody knows what's going on too. And I think, players typically, it's kind of a weird dynamic because, the Pacers only have theoretically X dollars to spend. Of course, you can spend more with certain rules and provisions that can get you over the cap. But on one hand, guys are always typically rooting for each other to get these kind of deals in place because they know how life-changing they can be. But at the same point, the Pacers only have so much money, to spread around in future years too. Now, obviously, in a scenario like this, it's not directly affecting any of these players. This is a contract that would begin next season. So I think there was just a general level of ease, if nothing else, from some of the other players that they're going to go into the season now, and this isn't going to be over Domantas's head. They're not going to have to worry about anything. But genuinely, even if this deal didn't get done, Sabonis is, I think, as much of a team-centered guy as I have been around in the NBA in my 6 years covering the Pacers. In fact, he almost speaks team like to an annoying level. Like sometimes we want to know something about his rebounding proficiency, and he's talking about the team. We're like, no, talk about yourself. So I really don't think it would have been an issue. But ideally, you get something like this done beforehand. Obviously, Myles Turner was able to benefit from it last year. And so I think it was a good thing for him and the guys around him to get this out of the way. And now, you look at where the Pacers are set up. Most of these guys that are at least part of their nucleus and their core are under deals that are longer term, which is very different. You remember last year, most of the team was on expiring contracts. So they've got kind of that comfort factor going into the season too. But of course, it'll be those guys' job, Nate McMillan's job, to make sure they aren't too comfortable if they still have that edge about them.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. I think the Pacers did a great job locking down this core group for 3 or 4 years to come. I don't think maybe Jeremy Lamb and Warren might be the shortest term contracts at 3. Obviously, Oladipo coming back, but you would think that they get an extension done soon. Going off that front court, though, we know a lot of fans have been excited about Goga. I'm sure you've heard about it. I'm sure you're excited as well. What can you tell us about him? I know he's a pretty funny guy. If you're following on Instagram, he's absolutely hilarious. But what can you tell us about Goga and how he's been in the preseason?
Well, first and foremost, it's been unbelievable to watch this transformation happen for me because on draft night, I sat down with Jeremiah Johnson right after the draft, and we went live on the Pacers social media channels and discussed the pick for about 15 to 20 minutes. And the whole plan was to take questions from the fans and to have a back and forth kind of chat. And the reaction on draft night was so negative, and it was almost like Jeremiah and I we're talking people off the ledge. Like, hold on, this guy the Pacers really wanted. The fact that they drafted a center should show you they really wanted him because they wouldn't have drafted a center if they didn't really like him. And then all of a sudden, this guy doesn't play, in Summer League. He doesn't play in the first preseason games. You start to get his personality a little bit, and then you're leading up into this 4th preseason game, and all of a sudden, everybody's dying to see him. Everybody, he already has this small cult following. He's checking into the game and getting a standing ovation, and that was all fascinating to watch play out because the guy hadn't even stepped on the floor yet, and it's like he went from unpopular to a bit of a cult status. But look, I think first and foremost, if you take a center with that pick, when you have 2 good centers, it shows from a front office perspective that they love this guy. I think, he's still got some areas where he needs, obviously, to get used to life in the NBA. We're operating here in the NBA at a higher speed than in the Euro leagues where he was before. And I think defensively, that's his biggest adjustment in the pick and roll. He really got a trial by fire having to guard Karl Anthony Towns there in that first game for a while, but he showed a lot of great things on offense too, knocking down a couple of threes, and he's a great shooter already. And I thought some comments from Myles Turner were pretty interesting, which he said Goga right now is ahead of pace from where Myles was at that point in his rookie year too. I think the EuroLeague has a lot to do with that. These guys come in often less raw than some of their American counterparts, and it's just going from one good professional league to a great professional league versus that jump from college to the NBA can often be a bit more stark. So I think he's still got a lot of growing to do on the defensive end, especially, and pick and roll coverages especially. But I love what he brings on the offensive end. I think he's, potentially a real weapon. And I think McMillan, if he has, his druthers about him, if Batadze can show he's worthy of a role, I think he wants him in the rotation this year.
Yeah, that sounds good. I know a lot of fans we speak to on Twitter are very excited to get Goga in the thick of things. Going off what you said, Pat, as well about, the draft night with Goga and, you had to talk some fans off the ledge, essentially. What do you think players' reactions are when they get booed or they know the fan base isn't happy? We know Reggie Miller was booed draft night. We all know how that ended, very well. But do you think players care about getting booed draft night, or they don't really take any of it in?
I think that sometimes we underestimate the fact that these guys really are humans. They notice these things, they feel these things, especially rookies coming into the league. They aren't hardened NBA veterans that are used to criticism. And so in his case, I don't totally know, because he wasn't like booed off stage or anything like that. And I don't even want to say, I don't think the Pacers fans even necessarily were negative toward him. I think they were surprised. And so I think if anything, some of the frustration with the Pacers fans was not understanding the move. And oftentimes, as I think everybody that follows the NBA closely knows, good front offices, tend to be a couple steps ahead of the fans. There's a reason they're in those positions. But yes, it's a good question. And Reggie Miller, got a lot of boos initially. The Pacers didn't select local Steve Alford. I remember Paul George on draft night got who'd, as in WHO''D. No one knew who Paul George was, and obviously he turned into a great NBA player. So luckily, those reactions tend to have very little bearing on a player's success level. And if anything, I think at this point, Goga has felt the love from the community. I think he is feeling, a lot of the positive vibes. He doesn't live too far from Bankers Life Fieldhouse. So I think I think that's always good when a rookie comes in and they get to kind of live in the city and experience, the most exciting part of what this state has to offer. And so I think he has felt welcomed. I think he's felt loved. I think he's really enjoying the ride. And ultimately, a lot of that will have to do with how he plays on the court. But if this front court pairing with Turner and Sabonis works well, Batadze off the bench, I think, could be a solid option at center if he can adjust quickly enough for McMillan's liking.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you right now, we on the Paceroos are absolutely on board with Goga. We are on the hype train. And just going on that front court as well, we know there's been questions we've asked about before. Previously with JJ, we asked about front court depth, but how do you see it playing out with Leaf obviously in there? You can throw Sampson at the backup for Holiday maybe. There's been some questions over whether or not that depth is maybe up to playoff standard, but how do you see that playing out?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think ultimately, if they really needed depth at that position, if Batadze proved he wasn't ready, if they didn't want to give big minutes to Sampson, if they didn't feel like TJ Leaf was ready for a significant role, you could always go back to more of a staggered rotation with Turner and Sabonis. And I'm not to say that they would bring Sabonis off the bench, but change that rotation, bring one of those guys out earlier. Maybe Sabonis would check out 6 minutes in, and then he would play some with the second unit too. So they'd have one of those guys on the floor. One of the great advantages the Pacers had last year was one of those two guys was on the floor almost 24/7. And I still expect that to be the case for a lot of this year too. They're going to be playing with each other more. Ultimately, I think in all those names that you give, you're going to have, probably a couple of players that surprise, maybe one or two that disappoint. But I think their depth there is okay just because of the changeability of Turner, Sabonis, Batadze. Sampson's going to be a solid pro. He's never going to probably be the guy that leads you to a victory, but a guy that you can come in. And the Pacers have had that the last few years. That third rotation big, it was Kyle O'Quinn last year, Al Jefferson when they needed him, that can come in and still provide a nice punch. So we'll see. I think there's going to be a lot of, just in general, the rotation. I think there stands to be the potential for a lot of jockeying. You go down the exercise of you take the 5 starters and then you keep going down the line. If McMillan only goes to the 9-man rotation, I think there are 13 guys that you can make a case that at least deserve a look at that rotation. Now, he might extend it to 10, which is not his favorite thing to do because he doesn't like diminishing the playing time for some of those other guys. But even if he goes to 10, there's still potentially, 3 guys. We're talking, the potential for TJ McConnell, Justin Holiday, TJ Leaf, Edmund Sumner. You're going to have to make some tough decisions somewhere. And to me, that's maybe the most interesting storyline going into the season. Who's in this initial rotation? And then as the year plays out, is there jockeying in some of those positions?
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that, Pat, because here at the podcast, me, Alex, and Adam have always gone back and forth with who we think's going to get those backup point guard minutes between TJ McConnell and Aaron Holiday and Edmund Sumner, which follows on to my next question beautifully. And it's exciting as a fan we can now talk about Victor Oladipo. You know, he's been cleared for 5-on-5 practice now, which is fantastic. I want to get your thoughts on how do you think he's going to come back? You know, we hear reports of, you know, he's going to be better than ever, and you know, oh, don't talk about it yet. It's really, you know, exciting that, you know, hopefully he may be back in December and January. But how do you think he's going to come back and perform?
Yeah, first and foremost, you know, I think it's important to understand that this is still, I'm very confident in this, viewed as a long-term decision as for when Oladipo comes back. We might hit a point where Oladipo feels like he's ready to go, and maybe if they wanted to push things, he could go. But look, this is a decision that impacts far beyond 2019, 2020, and you don't want to get it wrong. And the absolute last thing you want to do is bring a guy back in, you know, a couple weeks too early, and because you tried to push 2 weeks out of him, you ended up costing him months down the road. And I'm very confident the Pacers have a great medical staff, training staff, and I'm confident that that's, you know, first and foremost, point number one for them is to ensure he's not just ready to go, but he's more than ready, and that they're not pushing anything in this regard. It's very difficult to know a timetable. It's very difficult to know exactly how effective he will be when he's back. But I'll tell you this, it's just a great sight to see him running up and down the floor in 5-on-5s. I think that's a really good early sign. He's out there and he's doing more and more in practice each day, which seems to me to be a little bit ahead of schedule for where I personally expected him to be, which I would consider on my part an educated guess, but I'm in no means in any of those meetings, nor am I trained in any of those fields medically. So the other aspect of this is you know, there's a huge mental side to this, and some guys struggle coming back off injuries mentally, some guys don't, and that's a battle that Oladipo is going to have to battle. But I think in a situation like this, Oladipo's got the perfect temperament to you know, achieve as much as he can coming out. A lot of this is physical. How does his leg hold up? Can he get the same explosiveness? But assuming that he can, the mental side of that, trusting your leg and pushing forward, that's where, to me, Oladipo is one of the strongest players in the NBA. He's extremely determined. He's extremely driven, but he also doesn't take himself too seriously. And I think those two factors will really aid him positively in this recovery. And we don't know where in the season it's going to be. I can tell you the team kind of used this season in a 3-part portion. Portion A, portion 1 is the portion of the schedule before Oladipo comes back. Part 2 is this part when he is back, but he's still adjusting to his teammates on the floor and still getting back to 100% physically. And then the hopeful part 3 is when he's back to 100% and ready to go, and hopefully the Oladipo of old, and he's meshed with Brogdon, Warren, Sabonis, Turner, you know, potentially Lamb coming off the bench. And so there's going to be 3 stages into this season, and you can't rush those. And as a fan, as exciting as it's going to be when Oladipo takes the floor, I think it's going to be important to keep in the back of your mind, you know, this guy's not going to be on day 1 what he will hopefully be on day 15, 30, 45, 60, and even potentially, you know, 2020, 2021 down the road.
Yeah, 100%. I think, you know, the Pacers are not going to rush him back. They've seen this before with PG, so I think they've been through it. They've learned a lot, and I think they'll come out the other side better, and I'm sure Victor will as well. We know he's been killing it on The Masked Singer, even though he says he's not on it, but I think all the Pacers fans know it's him. But just going into the season a little bit, we do play the Pistons 3 times in the first month, I believe, and we just got news this morning that Blake Griffin will be out until, indefinitely until about the first week of November. So how do you see that first month playing out for the Pacers? We know it's probably the weaker portion of the schedule, but now with Griffin being out, do you think that we could see maybe a 7-3 or 8-2 start? I know that's optimistic, but you know, this group, they're going to have growing pains. They're going to have times where they're probably not meshing too well. But I think we saw enough in preseason to suggest that they might be have a very good record early on. So do you think that they're going to, you know, go 7-3, 8-2 maybe, or have a really good start?
I don't like to pick numbers, but I think they're hopeful of a really good start. When that schedule came out, I was more interested in it than ever because personally, I was hoping that if they had an easier portion of the schedule, it would be early. So that way, the worst case scenario for the season to me would be if they were to fall into a big hole and they'd be trying to dig themselves out of it as the year goes on. And then Oladipo comes back and he's really pressured to do big things. And I think that could be really challenging if that's the case. Now, obviously an easier schedule aids in that, but you have to take care of business too. The Griffin news to me was really surprising. And it sounds like he is going to miss definitely the opener, probably the first two. And just judging by the way injuries go, I would be surprised if he played in any of these three, just how teams report injuries and typically how they end up playing. Plus, they're not going to want to push Griffin back too early either and risk him furthering that and maybe missing a huge chunk of the season. So that's obviously a break. The early portion of the schedule, I think, is a positive occurrence for the Pacers, but they'll have to take care of business of that. And Jeremiah and I just got done taping a podcast, which we will have up tomorrow. We discussed this too. It's one thing to have this easier portion of schedule. They do have Charlotte in it. They've got Cleveland in it, but while they don't take on any of the top teams in the NBA in these first 11, a lot of these games are, with teams that are either around them or maybe just behind where you might project them to be, but close enough that if you don't play well, they would be easy to drop. And Detroit is absolutely still in that category. I think even without Griffin, that's been a tough place to play on the road. The Pacers struggled to play in Detroit last year. So I'm very hopeful of a strong start. I think if they could do something like a 7-3 in their first 10, that it would just really put them on good foundation in the beginning portion of the season. And if they can get off to a good start, then there's less pressure on Oladipo when he comes back, to be that all-star level player. The Griffin news helps, but ultimately, to me, the biggest factor is not who they're playing. It's how Indiana's playing. And I think if this team is meshing well, if the chemistry comes together, if Turner and Sabonis are figuring it out early, and if the team stays healthy in the early portion of the schedule, then I think there's a good chance they do get off to a strong start. But it's a lot of ifs. A lot of this has to be proven on the court, and it starts Wednesday night.
Yeah, we cannot wait for the seasons to start tomorrow. And here in Australia, it's a 10:30 a.m. game. So
very nice.
Yeah, it's a bit different. But speaking of Australia, I believe you're going to be the first one. We asked Scott Agnes and Jeremiah Johnson if they've ever been to Australia, and they haven't. So I hear rumours that you have been, and just want to get your opinion if you liked Australia and if you catch any games with the NBL. Obviously, we've got LaMelo Ball and RJ Hampton down there, Andrew Bogut. Just want your thoughts on the NBL if you know of it.
Unfortunately, I did not get to catch any NBL games. I did get to go to a was it rugby union or league? I can't remember.
Yeah.
But I if you could see me right now, I'm smiling because I did a trip in late August, early September of 2018 over to Australia and New Zealand, and I had the time of my life, man. It was so exciting. It was so much fun. I love to travel. So Jeremiah knows that. I'm always bothering him on the podcast about how he needs to get out to. I went on a couple of trips to Europe, and then was like Australia, New Zealand's the next thing I've got to hit up. And obviously, that is for somebody in the U.S. That trip to Australia is a lot more challenging than getting to like London. Like you can get to London in like a 5-hour flight. I think it was 16 from LA, which Indy's like 4 from LA. So it was maybe 20 hours in total to get over there. But did a couple weeks. We did Sydney, Cairns, and then went over to New Zealand, did Queenstown and Auckland, and then ended back in Sydney to leave. And I had an absolutely unbelievable time. Every city we went to, whether it was, I loved Sydney, one of my favorite big cities I've been to. The Great Barrier Reef was incredible. Yeah. I don't know if you've been to Queenstown over New Zealand, but it's an amazing place too. And the whole trip was fantastic. And it also left me with one of my favorite personal pieces of a little fun factoid information that I now get to claim for myself, which is that that plane ride is so long. And because you guys are 16 hours ahead, I was not on planet Earth for August 31st, 2018. I did not. I left Los Angeles on August 30th, and August 31st never happened, and stepped down in Sydney, Australia on September 1st. So that's it was an amazing trip. I would absolutely love to go back. And for anybody that's listening here in the U.S., if you've got some time, in your schedules or in the NBA offseason or whenever, highly recommend getting over there to Australia. And when you're in Australia, you're never going to be closer to New Zealand. So if you've got time to hike over there as well.
You could be a salesman for Australia, I reckon.
Man,
yeah, I was about to say.
You don't have to convince me. I absolutely loved it. I was there for 15, 16, 17 days, and I wish I was there for a month. I would love to go back.
Well, we are absolutely stoked to hear that, and we hope there's a Pacers game in Melbourne or anywhere in Australia sometime in the future. So maybe you can be the ambassador for us over there for that one.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's been interesting to watch kind of the transition of power in terms of just basketball throughout the world. Now, obviously, the U.S. is always going to be, when they have their number one team available, the top country. But I think the Frances and the Spains of the world will always be very competitive. I think England's getting there. But really, you look at where the landscape is now, I think Canada and Australia are the two teams that you really say, whoa, like in a couple of years, if a lot of these guys, kind of pan out, you've got as good a basketball outside of the U.S. as anywhere in the world is arguably either being played, in my opinion, in Australia or Canada. And it's exciting to see.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with you there. But just to close up here, we do ask for every guest, but we just want to, it can be anything, just any season prediction whatsoever. It doesn't have to be a win total or anything like that. It could be, a player averages 20 or 25 or something. We're big on Goga here, so we reckon he's going to win Rookie of the Year. But do you have any predictions in particular for the season?
Oh gosh, let me think. Let me think about one that I want to make here. I think I will say that not only does TJ Warren pick up off of last season, but I think the version that you saw of him in his final year in Phoenix is the version you're going to see. And I'll be honest, I was a big fan of that move because the Pacers essentially got him for free. If anything, they got paid to get him, which was absurd. But we were a little scared away. I was, or at least a little cautious because of the Tyreke Evans move last year. That just did not pan out. And he had this great year in Memphis. His 3-point numbers were up, and then he came here, and for whatever reason, it was not the same Tyreke Evans. But I'm confident enough in watching him. There's questions with a guy who doesn't shoot the three ball well for the first 4 years of his career and then does in year 5. Is that really sustainable? I've watched him. I really think it is. I think he's going to maintain being a really good shooter. I think he's going to be a huge weapon for the Pacers that's maybe going a little bit overlooked. I think those, like you guys that follow the team closely, understand his potential, but I think maybe the more casual fan doesn't quite know TJ Warren in the way that they will by the end of the year. And so I'll say not only does, he kind of move upon those numbers and continue upon those numbers you saw last year in Phoenix, he's not going to shoot quite as much as he might have in Phoenix, but I think those efficiency numbers are going to stay high. And I think he will hopefully stay healthy too. That's been the one kind of knock on his game, if there has been one, is he hasn't really stayed healthy. But, sometimes playing for a better team, you can't control the huge injuries, but sometimes just you see players that have struggled with staying on the floor, then they get to a better team and all of a sudden the games matter, and it has a funny way of keeping them on the floor. So I'll say TJ Warren, maybe for those who don't follow him quite as closely or the team quite as closely. I think this is going to be a name that is a household name in Pacers fans, whether it's in Indianapolis or all over the world by the end of the season.
Yeah, well, we absolutely hope so. So we want to thank you very much for coming on the show, Pat. You can follow him at Pat Boylan Pacers on Twitter, and also subscribe to the Sideline Guys on Pacers Sound or Apple or wherever you're listening to your podcast. It's a must listen. We really appreciate you coming on.
Hey, appreciate that too. Appreciate you guys getting up early and talking to me, and good luck with everything over there and with your season and getting up early enough to watch these games. I know that's got to be a unique dynamic of some weekday. Maybe you're at work, I don't know, trying to follow and watch. But
yeah, really I don't think our bosses like it too much.
It's amazing. We get these analytics on these podcasts that we do, and they'll show us obviously where everybody listens. And, honest to goodness, our number one country outside of the U.S. has been Australia, even ahead of like Canada. The people that listen to our podcast the most has been Australia. So we've got a nice grouping of fans over there. I hope you guys are able to find some around you, because we really get great numbers. Just the first time I looked at that, my jaw almost dropped, because it was like Australia was far and away number 2, even ahead of Canada. And, Indiana's only like a 3.5-hour drive away from the very southern portions of Canada. So that was cool to see. And I'm not totally sure how we have become quite as popular as we have over there, but we love it. We'll take it, and we appreciate all the support we get.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pat. Thank you.
All right, you're back on the Paceroos Podcast. That was the Pat Boylan interview. TJ Warren talked up massively. Australia talked up massively as well. Big fan of Australia, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Australia, he was the first guest. I know JJ said his wife came down, but Pat was the first guest we've actually had on who's travelled to Sydney himself. So unfortunately he didn't come to Melbourne, but it shows how much he loved Australia. And just great insights from Pat Boylan. And just can't wait to get the season started.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks again to Pat for giving of his time to our podcast. We've been blessed to have, obviously, JJ, Scott Agnes, and now Pat on the podcast. It's been fantastic to see such support from within the Indiana Pacers and around the Indiana journalists. So let's keep that going throughout the season. But speaking of the season, we're finally here. We've done a lot of previews. We've had a lot of chats about what could happen or what should happen. We're about to know what does happen. So Detroit is the first game, the first cab off the rank. As mentioned in the Pat Boylan interview, Blake Griffin is going to be missing at least the next 3 or 4 weeks with knee issues, which opens up the door for us to take away a couple of wins from Detroit as we play them a few times to begin the season. We're going to do one player that we think can win it for the Pacers, or our most important player in this game. We're also going to do an opposition player that we are frightened of, or that could be the party pooper for this particular game. So, Justin, I'll start with you. Who's your Pacers player to watch, or who's the most important player on the floor for us leading into this game against Detroit?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I'm actually going to go with the battle with Myles Turner and Andre Drummond. Statistically, Drummond usually kills Pacers on the boards. I'm worried about Drummond, getting a 20-20 game. So my biggest takeaway is how's Myles going to keep Andre Drummond off the glass. He's trained on it over the summer. We all saw a massive improvement in Myles in Team USA with rebounding and being real ferocious on the boards. That's what I'm going to be looking for. Is he going to box out properly? How much is he going to be, involved in our offense? Is he going to be passive? Is he going to be aggressive? I want to see the aggressive Myles Turner come out. He's got this contract. He's heard all the whispers about, people saying, he needs to do more, be in the post more, shoot more. I really want to see Myles be aggressive and take it up to Drummond.
Yeah, for me, I think the player I'd like to highlight is TJ Warren. Obviously, we've seen our insiders and our experts that we've interviewed all list TJ Warren as an impact player for the Pacers. I think this is a great matchup for him. If you look at the wings and forwards on Detroit's roster, there's probably no one that I can really see that's going to give him a great deal of problems on the offensive end. I think he's going to be able to score at will on just about anyone that Dwayne Casey in Detroit put against him. So TJ Warren's my guy.
Well, I probably should be going with TJ, seeing he's in my fantasy team, but I'm going to go with Sabonis. I think with Griffin out, as you mentioned, I think Sabonis is going to absolutely kill him. Justin, you said Drummond might go for 20-20. I'll do your one better. I think Sabonis is going to go 20-20. So
love it.
I think he's going to have an absolute monster of a night.
It's just funny, just quickly, how the difference in, I guess, attitude with the Sabonis extension has changed everyone's mindset a bit, where if he wasn't signed on, I'd be a bit concerned right now with chemistry and maybe Sabonis going into this match, but just having that all signed, sealed and delivered, all our worries are now gone. And I think we can expect a real big game from Domas.
Security and continuity are two massive things in any sports team, I think, and chemistry. So you're spot on there. In terms of players that, could have a big game against us and are a little bit of a concern. The one that I'd probably highlight is Luke Canard. I think if he gets hot, starts to hit a few threes, then we could see ourselves have to dig ourselves out of a little hole, or at the same time be in a tougher matchup than we're anticipating, because I think we're all expecting to win this game, especially with Griffin out. But just looking at a player that could get hot and hurt us, that's Luke Canard for me. Alex?
Yeah, I hate to be the boring one, but I think I've got to go Canard as well. We saw Lamb and Warren both struggle defensively in the preseason, and I think he's that guy. He's going to shoot a lot. with Griffin out, he's going to have to take a lot more shots. So, yeah, I could easily see him putting up 20, 25 plus.
I'll switch it up a bit, and maybe I'm still living in the past, but I still have nightmares about Derrick Rose when he played for Chicago against us in the playoffs. So I'm just going to go D Rose. I love him as a player, but he's killed the Pacers, and I know he's older now. I know he might be coming off the bench to Reggie Jackson, but D Rose still gives me nightmares.
Brilliant, but I think we're all fairly confident that that's going to get the job done for the Pacers, and obviously Griffin missing. I think we're pretty confident that we're going to ultimately come out on top. Speaking of coming out on top, we're also probably pretty confident going into our second game, which is against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Cleveland have struggled over the last couple of last season, losing LeBron James. They have a really young team, a couple of veterans that are on really big contracts like Kevin Love and Tristan Thompson. Not sure whether they're going in completely full strength, but they've certainly got a couple of young guards that have to prove themselves this year. Alex, we'll start with you this time. Who's our key player for Indiana in the game against Cleveland?
I think for this one, it's going to be Brogdon. I think he's going to go up against Colin Sexton. He's a young, fast guard. Same with Garland as well. So this is going to be a massive one for Brogdon, in my opinion. He did struggle a little bit guarding the quicker guards in preseason. So I think this will be a big test for him.
Justin?
Yeah, it's for me, it's probably not an actual individual player. I might just say the bench production for that game. You know, what are the likes of Doug McDermott going to do? Our first road game, Cleveland's first home game, so it's going to be rowdy in Cleveland. So,
will it be really though? Will it? I don't know.
Yeah, home openers always sell out. They always sell tickets for $10, and it'll be rowdy. So, I just think the bench production will be well. And we should be 2-0. Like when this, we should be recording our episode after being 2-0. That anything apart from that would be a disappointment. I know Adam, you mentioned Blake Griffin's missing, and that's Detroit's best player. Yeah, we still have to mention we're missing our best player too. Victor Oladipo's out, so they may cancel each other out a bit. But I think anything less than a 2-0 start would be disappointing.
Yeah, agree. I'm gonna go with my heart instead of my head on the second game, and I'm going to say that Goga's going to be the best player off our bench against Cleveland. I think with Ante Zizic being out injured, Kevin Love potentially being on minutes restrictions, that sort of stuff, it's going to open up our bench, and we have our backup center that's ready to show out, and I think he'll show out against Cleveland. Let's look at the opposition now. I'll kick off. I think a player that could obviously get hot against us and give us a few fits is clearly Kevin Love. Spoke of a potential minutes restriction, but I think if he's going into this game fit, and we don't exactly know how fit he is, he's the type of player that's going to stretch the floor for Cleveland, and he'll be a really big test with Domas and Myles having to go away from the basket a little bit to guard Kevin Love. So it'll be really interesting to see how we combat that. Justin, who's your player for Cleveland to watch?
Yeah, I always like doing something different, but it's Kevin Love. There's no one really else on that team that worries me, and I know I'll probably this will burn me after someone drops 30 points, but it's Kevin Love. He's really the only A-grader on that Cavaliers team, and it's funny, you go in the past, and Kevin Love's always been rumoured to be traded to the Pacers. I don't know why, but that rumour's come up about 40 times.
Yeah, I think it's just because he's a power forward, and we had two young centers, but now that they're locked up for the next 4 years, and we know that they're both going to be all-stars playing next to each other, then we don't even have to worry about Kevin Love rumors anymore, guys. Let's not give them any credence whatsoever. So those are the first two games. Any other around the NBA storylines, any other games, any other players that you're excited to watch in the first week of the season?
Well, just going back on that Cavs game quickly, I was actually going to mention one guy, Kevin Porter Jr. He's actually someone I really wanted the Pacers to draft. I think he's balled out in preseason. He looked really good. And I think he could give the bench unit some problems if he's being guarded by Dougie. So just watch out for Kevin Porter Jr. is all I'll say.
That is a deep cut. I really enjoy that, Alex.
Love it. Well, yeah, with the NBA, obviously the first two games of the season were yesterday, and two fantastic games. What better way to start the NBA off with an overtime game for the defending champion Raptors, and then the Lakers Clippers showdown. It was great atmosphere in Staples Center. It was a Clippers home game, but fans were booing Kawhi. It was just awesome to see, and Danny Green got hot for the Lakers, and Kawhi was just himself, and. I just want to make a special mention how awesome did those Toronto Raptors rings look. They looked like some hot bling.
They were blinged out. They were really blinged out. I think we've, as always in the season, we've got some fantastic games in the opening few days. I think looking at tomorrow after the Pacers game, you've got Boston and Philadelphia, and then you've got Denver and Portland. I think both of those games are going to be brilliant. All four of those teams have championship aspirations this season, and I think they're going to be fantastic start to finish. So regardless, the NBA is going to throw up incredible games all season long, but it's super exciting because we've been starved of basketball for many months.
Oh, you need about 4 televisions in your house to watch like an NBA day. Like we go over today or tonight's games, Pacers Pistons, we're all going to be obviously watching that. Like you mentioned, Adam, Celtics 76ers, that is going to be an awesome game. It's just Nuggets Trailblazers is another fantastic Western Conference game. Even something lesser like Timberwolves Nets is going to be interesting with Kyrie playing, and just so many awesome NBA games. If you haven't got League Pass, I'd be getting it right now.
That's a hell of an ad for League Pass, Alex. What are you looking forward to?
Well, we've had some very good advertisements in this episode, haven't we? We've had one for League Pass, and if Australian tourism is listening to this, they need to hit up Pat Boylan right now. But I'm just looking forward to the season in general. I think I'm looking forward to Goga winning Rookie of the Year, obviously. But I think Pacers are going to do well this year, despite what Zach Lowe might think. And the NBA is balanced for the first time in what seems like a long time. So
yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Alex, that the consensus is even talking to some Pacers fans, they have us missing out on the 8, and I can't see how that's fathomable in the Eastern Conference. Yeah,
I cannot believe that people are saying that. Like 9th seed, I've heard 35, 38 wins. If we win 35 games, I give the permission to a viewer to tweet me, and I'll do whatever they want.
That is a extremely wide berth that you're giving there, Justin.
Whatever they want. Berth. 35 wins, whatever they want.
Great. Okay, we'll roll with that and we'll get some suggestions. Feel free to tweet us at the Paceroos. What would you like to see Justin do if we only get 35 wins? It'll be a pretty somber Paceroos podcast if we only end up with 35 wins for the rest of the season. I'll give you the hot tip. But ultimately, the time for talk's over. People can give their predictions and people can look really silly in their predictions after a couple of months. We might look very silly with a few of our predictions, but I think one thing that we can all agree on is the Pacers are making the playoffs.
Yeah, in the Eastern Conference, I can't see from last year's playoffs how many teams would drop out of it and how many teams would come in. I mean, Orlando were like the 8th seed or something like that, or I can't see that many teams jumping in, to be honest. Maybe Miami. We mentioned maybe Miami. I can't see Pacers not making it unless there's major injuries or Malice at the Palace 2.0.
You would hope not.
Which I never want to live through again.
Don't ever say that on a podcast ever again. That is the last time we'll ever speak of the Malice of the Palace. And on that somber note, I think we'll leave it there, guys. We'll be with you again after the first couple of games to review and preview the next couple. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Paceroos Podcast. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, guys.
Remember, tweet at the Paceroos to tell Justin what you want him to do if we win 35 games or under. Thanks for listening to the Paceroos.